Welcome back to the Divine Guide podcast, where we are exploring the profound insights of Muhammad Ali Amir-Moezzi's groundbreaking work. In our previous episodes, we examined the foundational concepts of early Imamite thought. Today, we continue our journey through chapter 1, where we examine the dramatic transformation of early Shi'a Islam from its mystical esoteric origins to its rationalized theological form. In this episode, we will explore some controversial early beliefs about the true Quran that Imam Ali alayhi salam possessed, the traditions about the hidden Imam's return, and how the occultation of the 12th Imam and the theological pressures from the Mu'tazilite school of thought forced Shia scholars to reconcile their teachings with the rationalist intellectual currents of their time. What we will discover is nothing short of remarkable. A hidden history of esoteric teachings that challenges conventional understandings of Shi'ism and reveals the profound spiritual dimensions of early Imamite thought. So join us as we uncover how and why certain sacred traditions were progressively silenced, fundamentally reshaping Imamite doctrine forever. Let's begin with one of the most controversial topics in early Imamite tradition, the question of the Qur'an. According to Amir-Moezzi, the earliest compilations of Imamite traditions contain numerous statements stating that after the Prophet Muhammad's death, only Imam Ali possessed the complete integral version of the Quran. This is a profound claim that deserves careful consideration. According to these early traditions, what we now know as the Uthmanic Codex, the standard version of the Quran compiled during the Caliphate of Uthman, was considered by the Imams to be incomplete. In fact, these traditions suggest that the official Quran, the Quran in circulation, contains only about a third of the integral revelation. The complete Quran, according to these traditions, contained not just legal and ethical teachings, but all the mysteries of the heavens and the earth, of the past, the present, and the future. And this comprehensive text was reportedly passed down secretly from one Imam to the next, eventually coming into the possession of the 12th Imam, who took it with him into occultation. According to this view, humanity will only know the complete Quran after the return of the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who will reveal its full contents to the world. Now, what makes this particularly fascinating is how this view evolved over time. Starting with Sheikh Saduq ibn Babawayh, who lived in the 4th century Hijri and who represents the last great name among the early Imamite traditionists. We see a dramatic shift in the official Shiite position. After him, not only are these traditions about an incomplete Quran passed over in silence, but Shiite scholars began to explicitly affirm that the Uthmanic Codex contains the entirety of divine revelation. The earlier claims about textual alterations are reinterpreted to suggest that what was suppressed are not verses of the Quran itself, but rather Imam Ali's commentaries, his tafsir, and his hermeneutical interpretations, his tawil. And this position has been maintained and defended almost aggressively by most Imamite scholars up to the present day, with only a few exceptions among the old Akbari scholars. What we're witnessing here is a profound transformation in Shiite doctrine, one that brings it closer to the Sunni orthodoxy on a fundamental theological issue. What's happening is reinterpretation. And what this means is to disregard the apparent, even the obvious meanings of the hadith, and reinterpret it in the light of the other dominant school of thought. Reinterpret it from a potentially politically dangerous position to one that is more aligned with mainstream Islamic orthodoxy. And this pattern of reinterpretation becomes a recurring theme in the evolution of Imamite thought. Another fascinating area where we see this progressive silencing of certain traditions concerns the 12th Imam, particularly regarding his ashab or juyush, meaning his companions or his troops, who will join him at the time of his return and in the final battle against injustice. Early Imamite traditions contain detailed accounts of these companions, their numbers, their origins, their spiritual qualities. And these traditions often had a distinctly esoteric and mystical character and even contained elements that modern sensibilities might describe as magical or occult. They spoke of supernatural abilities, divine knowledge, and cosmic battles between the forces of justice and injustice. These teachings, which formed part of the original Imamite doctrine as presented through the words of the Imams themselves and recorded by the earliest compilers, were clearly of what Amir-Moezzi calls heterodox, esoteric, and mystical character. It's important to note that we're focusing here on doctrinal and dogmatic traditions, not the juridical ones, meaning not the ones that deal with practical laws of Islam. In matters of religious law, early Imamite tradition actually had few significant differences with Sunni legal tradition. And these differences were not really any more significant than the jurisprudential differences among the internal Sunni divisions themselves. The major distinctions lie in the realm of theology, cosmology, and metaphysics, or to use the term coined by Amir-Moezzi in Imamology, the doctrine of the Imam. To understand why these traditions began to be silenced or reinterpreted, we need to appreciate the profound impact of the occultation of the 12th Imam on the Imamite community. The occultation, both minor and major, and the consequent absence of an impeccable guide, the Masum Imam, to lead the community, represented a seismic shift in Imamite history. The Imam's occultation in the early 4th century Hijri marked a crisis point for the Shiite community. The divine guide, the Imam who had led the community, was now hidden from view, leaving a vacuum of leadership behind. And the occultation coincided with a period when the intellectual climate of the Islamic world was deeply influenced by theological rationalism, particularly of the Mu'tazilite school, which emphasized and promoted reason as the final arbiter of religious truth. At this stage, Imamite scholars found themselves in a difficult position. They were the guardians of non rational teachings that were very challenging to justify in theological and Quranic terms to the wider Islamic community. In an intellectual climate that increasingly valued rational explanation. without an accessible Imam to guide them, and living in a socially hostile environment, and in an intellectual climate that favored rationalism, Imamite scholars were in a predicament and faced a profound dilemma. Faced with these challenges, Imamite thinkers appear to have made a strategic compromise between preserving the original doctrine and avoiding direct conflict with, with dominant ideologies. This led to what Amir-Moezzi describes as a progressive silencing of certain traditions, a process we can trace through the works of several key figures that we're going to list them now. First is Sheikh Safar al-Qummi, who lived during the transition from the period of the Imam's presence to their absence. Then is Sheikh al-Kulaini, who lived during the minor occultation. And then Sheikh Saduq ibn Babawayh, who lived during the major occultation. And through their works, we can observe this gradual silencing of traditions taking place. What emerges from Amir-Moezzi's analysis is the recognition of two distinct traditions within Imamism, which help explain the many contradictions and inconsistencies in modern studies of Imamism. First, there's what he calls esoteric non-rational Imamism, the original tradition reported primarily by the traditionalist scholars of the Qummi school. This is what Amir-Moezzi means when he refers to early Imamism, and it's the focus of his study. This tradition emphasized the supra-rational, mystical, and esoteric dimensions of the Imam's nature and function. Second, there is the theological, juridical, rational Imamism. The later tradition, influenced by the Mu'tazilite rationalism and represented by the rationalist theologians and jurists of the Baghdadi school. Figures like Al-Mufid and Al-Murtada led this movement towards rationalization and attempted to bring Imamite thought closer to orthodox positions. They attempted to make Shi'ism more intellectually defensible in a milieu, in a climate dominated by rational theology. And the consequences of this shift were twofold. First, the essential doctrinal traditions with the rich metaphysical and mystical dimensions that place them outside mainstream Islamic orthodoxy underwent a process of rationalization and reinterpretation to align with more mainstream Islamic thought. Scholars like Al-Mufid and Al-Murtada attempted to reconcile these traditions with the more orthodox positions. Second, aspects of the original tradition that couldn't be easily rationalized were often openly and violently condemned in the name of reason and even rejected outright. The confusion between these two Imamite traditions or approaches, which represent fundamentally different worldviews, has led to many of the inconsistencies and contradictions we see in academic studies of Imamism. What we are witnessing is not simply a theological evolution, but a profound shift in how a religious community relates to its foundational teachings. The early Imamite tradition presented a radically different vision of Islam, one in which the Imams possessed supernatural knowledge, where the commonly accepted Qur'an was incomplete, and where mystical, even occult elements were central to the faith. What makes the Shiite case so fascinating is that we can trace this process through preserved texts spanning several centuries. Let's consider what might have been lost in this process of rationalization. The early esoteric tradition represented a unique spiritual vision, one that emphasized direct mystical knowledge, the superhuman nature of the Imams, and access to hidden dimensions of reality. By rationalizing these teachings, later Shiite scholars may have gained intellectual credibility, but at the cost of the tradition's original spiritual depth. The recognition of this early supra-rational esoteric tradition is essential for understanding authentic Imamism. Many modern studies of Shi'ism fail to properly distinguish between these two very different traditions, leading to what Amir-Moezzi describes as incoherencies, extrapolations, and contradictions. This distinction becomes Amir-Moezzi's second methodological criterion in his study. He evaluates sources based on their fidelity to this original esoteric doctrine, allowing him to trace the authentic early teachings of the Imams without the later rationalistic overlays. In other words, by recognizing the existence of the early supra-rational esoteric tradition, we can measure the degree to which the later sources remain faithful to the original doctrine. And what makes this approach so valuable is that it allows us to recover the profound spiritual and metaphysical dimensions of early Imamite thought, dimensions that have often been obscured by later theological developments. What's remarkable is not that certain traditions were silenced, but that so many were preserved. The earliest collections have miraculously preserved these teachings and provide us with the window we need into understanding early Shia Islam. What are the implications of Amir-Moezzi's analysis for our understanding of modern Shi'ism? First, it suggests that contemporary Twelver Shi'ism, with its emphasis on rational theology and jurisprudence, represents just one trajectory of the tradition. And despite the historical shift towards rationalism, the esoteric dimension never completely disappeared. It continued to flow like an underground river through Imamite thought, occasionally emerging in the works of mystically inclined scholars and philosophers throughout the centuries. Second, it raises the possibility that aspects of the original esoteric tradition may have been preserved in less visible streams of Shiite thought. We see glimpses of it in the Ishraqi, also known as the Illuminationist philosophy, of figures like Sohrawardi, in the theoretical Sufism of Ibn Arabi, and in the transcendent theosophy of Mulla Sadra. Even today, elements of this esoteric tradition continue to inspire spiritual seekers within the Shiite world. Third, it challenges both scholars and believers to recognize the complexity and diversity within the Shiite tradition. Rather than seeing Shi'ism as a monolithic entity, we need to appreciate the different currents that have shaped its development. For modern seekers of spirituality, the recovery of this early esoteric tradition offers powerful insights. The original conception of the Imam as a perfect human, a repository of divine knowledge, and a cosmic necessity speaks to deep spiritual longings that transcend specific religious traditions. The idea that there exists a complete Quran containing all the mysteries of the heavens and the earth suggests that the divine revelation is far more comprehensive than generally understood. And it points to levels of meaning and knowledge that go beyond just literal interpretation. Similarly, the traditions about the 12th Imam's companions suggest a community of spiritually transformed individuals who will help usher in an age of justice. This vision of spiritual transformation leading to social and cosmic renewal remains deeply relevant in our current troubled times. As we conclude this episode, let's reflect on the journey we've taken through the early Imamite traditions. We've discovered a rich esoteric tradition that offers profound insights into the nature of spiritual authority, divine knowledge, and human perfection. We've seen how this tradition was gradually silenced and reinterpreted as the Imamite community adapted to the challenges of the occultation of the Imam and the intellectual climate of medieval Islam. And we've recognized the importance of distinguishing between the original esoteric non-rational Imamism and the later theological, juridical, rational Imamism that emerged in its wake. What emerges from Amir-Moezzi's careful study is a picture of early Imamism as a deeply spiritual tradition centered on the figure of the Imam as a cosmic necessity and a divine guide. This tradition, while it may have been obscured by later developments, remains a powerful current within Shiite spirituality and offers profound insights for contemporary seekers. In our next episode, we'll continue our exploration of the Divine Guide, delving deeper into the specific doctrines of early Imamism and their spiritual implications. Until then, I encourage you to reflect on the profound vision of spiritual guidance and divine knowledge that we've encountered in today's discussion. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Divine Guide. I will see you next time. Ma salam.